Imagine a world where nuclear energy and nuclear weapons never existed. No mushroom clouds darkening the sky, no power plants humming with uranium, no threat of mutually assured destruction. It's a world that diverged from our own at a crucial juncture, where the atomic age never dawned. What would this world look like, and how would the absence of nuclear technology shape geopolitics, energy, science, warfare, and humanity's future? To begin unraveling this alternate reality, we need to understand what nuclear technology has done for the world as we know it. Nuclear energy has provided a powerful source of electricity for countries around the globe. It has fueled entire cities, supported industrial expansion, and, in some cases, helped reduce dependence on fossil fuels. At the same time, the invention of nuclear weapons marked a turning point in human history, shifting the dynamics of global conflict. The mere existence of these weapons has deterred wars, ended others, and created decades of tense stalemates. Now erase all of that. Take away the Manhattan Project. Take away Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Remove Chernobyl, Fukushima, and 3 Mile Island from the timeline. Remove the promise of limitless clean energy and the ever-looming threat of instant annihilation. What rises in its place? In this nuclear-free world, the course of World War II changes dramatically. Without the atomic bomb, the United States does not have a decisive tool to force Japan's surrender in 1945. Instead, the Pacific War drags on. A prolonged campaign to invade the Japanese mainland results in more lives lost on both sides. The Soviet Union might have expanded its influence further into East Asia, possibly occupying parts of Japan. The post-war balance of power would shift, perhaps making the Cold War look entirely different, or perhaps erasing it altogether. Without nuclear weapons, the doctrine of deterrence never materializes. The Cold War may have played out through conventional military buildups and proxy wars, but without the existential fear of atomic war, escalation becomes more tempting. The Cuban Missile Crisis, a moment when the world stood on the brink of destruction, never happened. But other conflicts, such as those in Korea or Vietnam, could have intensified, as nations felt freer to act without fearing a nuclear retaliation. Paradoxically, the absence of nuclear weapons might have led to more conventional wars, not fewer. The arms race of the mid-20th century takes a different form. Instead of a race to build bigger and better bombs, superpowers focus on conventional weapons, missile technology, and perhaps even chemical and biological warfare. This could have made the world more unstable. The threat of nuclear destruction kept many military conflicts limited, as nations feared escalation. Remove that fear, and war might become a more frequent tool of diplomacy. Geopolitically, smaller nations would have less leverage. In today's world, a nuclear arsenal gives certain countries power beyond their size. Think of North Korea. In a world without nukes, military might would depend more heavily on economic strength, alliances, and geography. Countries like Iran, Pakistan, and India wouldn't have the nuclear card to play in regional disputes. Global power structures might look far more unipolar, or dominated by a handful of economically powerful nations. Meanwhile, nuclear energy's absence dramatically alters the world's energy landscape. Countries like France, which gets more than 70% of its electricity from nuclear sources, would have leaned heavily on coal, oil, and gas. Global carbon emissions might be even higher. Renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, and hydro would have faced more pressure to evolve faster. But until those technologies matured, the planet would burn more fossil fuels, accelerating climate change, polluting the air, and causing widespread ecological damage. The oil-rich nations in the Middle East might have become even more powerful in a world that's more reliant on hydrocarbons. Conflicts over energy resources could have intensified, leading to more wars and territorial disputes. The environmental toll of this intensified dependence would be staggering. Deforestation, rising sea levels, ocean acidification, and an even more severe biodiversity crisis. From a scientific and technological standpoint, the lack of nuclear research stunts several areas of progress. The field of nuclear medicine, vital for cancer treatments, imaging, and diagnostics, would not exist as we know it. Millions of lives saved by radiation therapy and diagnostic tools like PT scans would have been lost. Agricultural practices that use radiation to prevent pest infestations or to sterilize food would be more limited. Space exploration, too, would be hampered, as nuclear propulsion and energy systems allow for longer, more ambitious missions beyond Earth. On a cultural level, the absence of nuclear anxiety changes the tone of human imagination. No radioactive monsters in 1950s horror films, no fallout shelters, no apocalyptic visions of nuclear winter. Science fiction would lose a central metaphor, the double-edged sword of human progress. The existential questions about humanity's responsibility, hubris, and control over its inventions might shift toward other technologies like AI or biotechnology. But the global psyche would miss a profound reckoning. There's also a symbolic aspect to nuclear technology. It represents both the peak of human ingenuity and the depth of our destructiveness. Its absence means humanity might take longer to confront the ethical limits of its capabilities. Without the bomb, perhaps we delay the broader societal conversations about science, ethics, and responsibility that emerged post-1945. However, it's not all doom and gloom. In this alternate world, there are no Chernobyls or Fukushimas, no radioactive fallout zones or decades-long cleanup efforts. The world might be safer in terms of long-term contamination. Fear of dirty bombs and nuclear terrorism would vanish. Disarmament talks, nuclear non-proliferation treaties, and the immense cost of maintaining and securing nuclear arsenals would be unnecessary. Nations could redirect those resources toward healthcare, education, and sustainable development. At the same time, the economic benefits derived from nuclear energy, jobs, innovation, regional development, would need to be replaced. Entire industries would not exist. Nations that invested heavily in nuclear energy would rely instead on coal plants or imported gas. The political implications of that dependence could shift alliances, trade agreements, and even spark new conflicts. In this world, military spending looks different. With no nuclear weapons to serve as ultimate deterrents, countries might pour even more resources into developing advanced conventional arms. Aircraft carriers, tanks, missiles, and drones become even more important. Smaller nations, unable to equal the military strength of larger powers, would either form tight alliances or remain politically marginalized. The concept of global balance through peace through strength might not hold as strongly. The United Nations and other global organizations would operate in a different atmosphere. Non-proliferation would not be a topic of debate. Instead, the focus might be on conventional arms control or biological weapons. The lack of nuclear risk could encourage more aggressive diplomatic stances, knowing that miscalculation won't result in global catastrophe. Education and scientific collaboration also evolve differently. The vast global network of nuclear research centers, reactors, and international regulatory bodies like the IAEA wouldn't exist. Some scientists might focus on different disciplines, redirecting innovation into fields like genetics, renewable energy, or space. The Manhattan Project, as both a scientific feat and cautionary tale, is absent from human memory. That void might mean less inspiration for international cooperation in science, or perhaps more freedom from militarized research. Now, consider space exploration. Nuclear energy has powered some deep space missions, including those involving radioisotope thermoelectric generators. Without nuclear energy, these missions would be more difficult or delayed. The dream of colonizing Mars or sending probes deep into the solar system could take longer. Our reach into the cosmos becomes more limited, at least temporarily. Culturally, generations would grow up without the ever-present anxiety of nuclear war. No Cold War air raid drills, no dystopian novels based on atomic holocaust, no global protests for disarmament. Instead, social movements may rally around other threats. Perhaps climate change gains more urgency earlier. Or maybe humanity simply finds new ways to fracture and polarize. Would the world be more peaceful? That's hard to say. Without the threat of nuclear annihilation, wars might be fought more readily. But those wars, while still devastating, wouldn't end human civilization in a flash. The world might trade the existential fear of total destruction for a more frequent, grinding kind of conflict. Could the absence of nuclear weapons actually make peace harder to achieve? Some historians argue that the sheer horror of nuclear war has acted as a brake on superpower aggression. Without that horror, humanity might revert to older patterns of expansion, conquest, and nationalism unchecked by existential risk. On the other hand, without the power imbalances created by nuclear weapons, global diplomacy could become more egalitarian. Smaller countries wouldn't be bullied by larger ones with bombs. The path to peace might rely more on soft power, trade, diplomacy, culture, rather than hard power and brinkmanship. Looking toward the future, the world continues to grapple with energy demand, climate change, and global conflict. Without nuclear energy, the urgency to innovate in renewables accelerates. Perhaps humanity discovers better solar, wind, or fusion solutions earlier. Or perhaps climate change worsens before any solutions arrive. Without nuclear weapons, peace might be harder to maintain or easier to negotiate. In the end, a world without nuclear technology is neither utopia nor dystopia. It is simply different, shaped by altered incentives, redirected fears, and reimagined futures. The absence of the atom reshapes war, science, energy, and ethics in unpredictable ways. Whether that world is safer or more dangerous remains uncertain, but it would undoubtedly be a world less defined by the glow of radiation and the shadow of annihilation. And that, in itself, is a fascinating vision of what might have been.